Hello and welcome to Zero Doubt in the Zero Trust branch. Today's webinar is sponsored by Palo Alto Networks and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh is going to fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to learn more about Palo Alto's Prisma SD-WAN and a link to an ebook about setting a secure foundation for a new world of possibilities with Prisma SASE. Those are both great resources, and I really encourage you to access them now and also to share them with your friends and your colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. And with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic content. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We have Mitesh Patel, who's Vice President for SASE Go-to-Market at Palo Alto Networks. Mitesh is an expert in all things SD-WAN and SASE at Palo Alto, so we're all in for some great insights and context here today. Mitesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott, for the time. Appreciate it. So today I'm actually going to touch on a couple of different things around SASE and more specifically how SD-WAN fits into SASE and the value of actually building a zero trust branch. By way of introductions, my name is Mitesh Patel. As Scott said, I run go-to-market for Palo Alto Networks. Now, when we look at the general market, first of all, what are some of the trends we're seeing with different customers is essentially there's three major trends. One is as customers have employed more and more SaaS applications in their environment, where they've lost control over the traditional networks, right? So where if you look back 20, 30, 40 years ago, 100% of the workloads were coming back within the data centers. And so, in fact, I was just at a global manufacturing company just this week, and that's been his biggest challenge in that he says when it comes to latency issues, when it comes to application performance and that, he's reliant on the different SaaS vendors and cloud providers, and he's lost all control over delivering any sort of visibility and or functionality to solve for it. The second vector that we're seeing more and more of, and we've seen it for a while, but I guess more and more people are putting attention to it, is essentially IoT and the unmanaged and managed devices within a set office or building, where a lot of these services are actually managed through third-party vendors, third-party solutions. So even though they are trusted organizations coming in, what if a bad actor were to come in via that mechanism and connect into the environment? Because a lot of these devices are actually connected on the same network or even segmented networks where the employees are connected or the consumer is connected. So we're seeing more and more of that coming in as well. And the last one, when we look at it, and I think we saw an uptick on this during the pandemic, but it continues to be a trend, is essentially mergers and acquisitions. So the biggest challenge in IT we've always faced for many years is fundamentally integrating into two organizations together and the challenges associated with that, whether it's a risk a tolerance of what exactly am I getting with this acquired company and all the security implications of that. And then also from a networking standpoint, all the challenges associated with that, which are around overlapping IPs and just basically bringing and converging on network and security. So I'll kind of touch through a couple of these and talk through how we actually solve for it. Now, when you look at the traditional wide area network, we've been in this space for many years. Essentially, most of our customers have evolved and actually have now hundreds, if not thousands, of branch locations. We see this in manufacturing, retail, financial, healthcare. Just about every vertical in the industry today has hundreds or thousands of branches. So with that, back in the days, we used to use MPLS, private lines. Life is good. We had all the SLAs that we wanted. But the challenge with that was always it was a higher cost connection, even though I got the guarantees. And so when you look at today's workloads, where you're moving over to SaaS and cloud workloads, which require additional bandwidth, we lose the cost implications of upgrading MPLS has always been a challenge. So fast forward, we've basically been in this SD-WAN market for about a decade now. A lot of customers have migrated off of MPLS onto internet circuits. We still have some customers who have a hybrid scenario of MPLS and internet, which is perfectly fine, whatever your business requirements are. But the challenge has been a couple of things where historically IT organizations are centralized probably closer to headquarters or the data centers, things like that. My branches could be anywhere in the world. And so the ability to actually isolate, troubleshoot, manage that environment is very cumbersome. And the controls are difficult to do when you're not sitting in front of the box. And so most customers are looking at saying, hey, how do I actually reduce the technical debt I have across all my branches, as well as deliver a high performance connection, low latency type connectivity to my application workloads. So when you look at the general market of what SD-WAN did from back in the days when we had MPLS was essentially saying, I'm going to basically automate a couple of capabilities. The one challenge was deployment. So how do I deliver zero touch or minimal touch deployment? A lot of automation techniques coming into play. The second was essentially back in the days, we used to bring up the VPN tunnels manually, and it was very cumbersome to do. There was a lot of risk associated with it of human error. And in addition to that, the keys that were the pre-shared keys that were assigned to these solutions was pretty much whatever was assigned at day one ended up remaining in the environment. So there was a security risk associated with that. Essentially, somebody got a hold of that pre-shared key, you had access to the entire network. So one thing that SD-WAN did was saying, hey, we're going to actually automate the VPN tunnel bring up, and we're going to rotate keys on a regular cadence. But when you looked at the decision tree of how I was routing traffic through this network, not much change from that realm. So what do I mean by that is, how do I understand the health of that link? So back in the MPLS days, we used to turn on basically probing solutions. So we turn on IPSLA, and it would basically give me some metrics around latency loss jitter. So I understood between my branches in Sydney or San Francisco to my data center in New York, I had understanding of latency measures. But for the workloads that if I'm in Sydney, Australia, going directly to Microsoft's cloud, to Salesforce's cloud, to Workday's cloud, or any other SaaS vendor, how am I actually making decisions on that? Because is the value of understanding the latency between Sydney and New York relevant anymore? If I'm going straight out in Australia connecting to Microsoft's cloud, doesn't matter, or it shouldn't matter, right? But yet, if you look at SD-WAN solutions today, this is how they operate. So our approach was slightly different in the sense that we said, what if we actually transition to actually looking at it at the session layer? So there's this constant debate of packet versus session and that, and we can have a glorious discussion around that. But basically, our approach was saying, if I operate at a session layer, I have a better understanding of the health of that link to that set application, door to door, right? So whether I'm in Sydney, whether I'm in San Francisco, whether I'm in Singapore, whether I'm in Japan, whether I'm in London, or whether I'm somewhere in the US, it doesn't really matter, right? Essentially, our approach was saying, I'm going to monitor the health of that session to that set application, door to door, for every single application a user connects to. That allows me now to make more informed decisions on picking the best available path to deliver the best user experience. Secondly, essentially, we've added additional functionality to that. So, like I said, how do I actually accelerate my traffic? So, if I look back, when we were in the MPLS world, 10, 15 years ago, we used to use WAN optimization technologies. So with WAN optimization, we solved for a significant challenge back then when we were accessing file sharing applications as an example. So with CIFS, NFS, that are chatty protocols, WAN optimization took care of it. But it was a protocol-based technology, and it was a bookended technology. So with us, when we introduce App Accelerator into the solution, it allows me now to basically solve for even my workloads that are not destined to the data center. So I could be going to a SaaS application. And in fact, the solution was actually built for dynamic content, where if I'm accessing dashboards in salesforce.com, and it may take me, let's just say 10, 15 seconds to load up all my widgets, how do I actually accelerate and optimize that performance? So with the solution, we've done some interesting techniques, which I'll touch on later on. And then the last thing is essentially, how do I get additional insights above and beyond on my overlay, where I'm collecting these latency loss jitter metrics? With the Prisma SD-WAN solution, I'm actually collecting additional session level metrics. But how do I actually know that my carrier is misbehaving, or there's some hop between my site and that application that's misbehaving? So we introduced a technology called ADAM, and this basically goes hop by hop all the way to the application and is able to give me additional data on the health of that connection. So now we can actually, call carriers and actually give them more informed decisions that, they have a point in their network that's misbehaving. Or it could be on your LAN network and the wireless is misbehaving. But basically, quickly isolating a problem has been the challenge for many, many years. That whole finger pointing game, we constantly, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. But then we spend a week, a day, a month, basically trying to figure out whose problem it is. So what we wanted to deliver is solve for some operational value of isolating problems within minutes or seconds rather than days, weeks, or months. Now, when you look at from an SD-WAN perspective, like I said, I'm going to double click on essentially now the direct to application, direct to cloud, direct to SaaS application workloads, where I do want to employ some security. So if you remember, what I want to do first and foremost is reduce my technical debt. So I don't want to have to employ switches, wireless, SD-WAN, and firewalls, and other components and WAN optimization technologies. So what we're doing now is where we see more and more customers employing SSE solutions. Well, the challenge with that now is essentially you can do a mix and match. By all means, most of our customers do have some sort of a mix and match that have gone down the path of SD-WAN and SSE. But what happens from a pure networking standpoint? Essentially, everything I talked about, the key rotations, the last mile optimization that we used to do on wide area networking, things like FEC, things like packet dupe, when you do mix and match, you lose those capabilities. So in a traditional wide area network where it's typically branched to data center and you turn on FEC, you turn on packet dupe, life is good. Between those two connections, you can actually do those techniques. But when you connect it to a third-party solution, you cannot. The other piece is also from an operational standpoint, you're logging into multiple tools. So now the finger pointing game continues. Is it a networks problem? Is it a security problem? Is it an application problem? So it's very fragmented on how people operate and manage the environment, and that's been a challenge. So our approach was saying, if you actually go with Prisma SD-WAN and Prisma Access, we basically give you a full end-to-end zero trust architecture. So all the networking goodness that you have at a branch with our Prisma SD-WAN solution extended to Prisma Access. Obviously, within Prisma Access, we give you a full suite of zero trust security functionalities, right? And we were able to extend that end-to-end there. So when I talk about end-to-end, fundamentally, let's just touch on the network layer for a second. So from a pure networking standpoint, I build out my SD-WAN fabric, and I have my various paths available to me, either some apps going to the data center, some apps going to cloud or SaaS, And then I have my regular internet traffic as well. So one of the first things we did, like I said, is I'm extending the SD-WAN fabric into Prisma Access, which allows me to maintain the link conditioning capabilities. The second thing is within the middle mile. So, if you think about middle mile, when we were in the MPLS world, we had guaranteed SLAs of latency. So, where most customers look at solving for middle mile with vendors like Equinix or Megaport or things like that, which you still can do, right? You absolutely have that flexibility. But using an SSE solution, we also offer basically a low latency connection. You basically have a premium connectivity on their backbones. We do run on multiple hyperscalers, so you actually get resiliency across multiple hyperscalers that you don't have to manage. So we've all seen the different CSPs around the world over the years. They've all had issues at some point in time. If you're connected to a Prisma Access POP with our solution, and if it so happens that at the primary region you're connected to, it has some misbehavior or some outage against that CSP, we'll actually automatically reroute you to the next region. That may or may not be the same CSP, maybe a different CSP, but we'll take care of that on our solution. And then the last thing is around App Accelerator, which I just talked about. Fundamentally, there's a couple of key components to that. With App Accelerator, like I said, one is essentially, if you think about traditionally where we used to use CDN technologies, it's better than the traditional CDN technology, because with CDN, you were effectively just doing a static cache of that content. But in today's world, a lot of these tools, it's dynamic content. So it could be I'm using my widgets on Salesforce every morning. I come in, I log in, and I look at all the data for the day, and then I go about my business. So fundamentally now with this tool, I'm able to actually prefetch that content on login, and it will come down to the closest POP that I'm attached to. So when I do end up loading that dashboard, it's a matter of seconds that that dashboard will actually load. And in addition to that, not only does it only take us a few seconds, but we've applied all the security logic. So where historically it's taken maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds, I bring that down to just a few seconds. So we've seen improvements with App Accelerator turned on with some of these SaaS applications of literally 5 to 10x performance improvement. So once again, we've always looked to solve for latency as a networking person because we're always the first line of defense. This is actually a great technology above and beyond just the traditional WAN optimization tools that are bookended. So I'm going to double click a little bit further on this line conditioning technique that we use. So when you think about it, like I said, we're all accustomed to FEC, we're all accustomed to packet dupe. Great technology, router to router, or SD-WAN to SD-WAN of like vendors. But when I'm going to an SSE solution, I lose these functionalities, right? So I just want to emphasize, fundamentally, I can actually connect to multiple Prisma Access regions. So I have the ability to go active-active, whereas traditionally we've seen with other vendors, you can only go active on one link and the second link is just there as a backup link, right? Which falls short of what SD-WAN was built for. SD-WAN was designed to be built for active-active capabilities. So you fundamentally, when you do the mix and match, you're pretty much giving up on SD-WAN functionality. You're going back to traditional routing mechanisms where you're saying, here's my preferred path, here's my secondary path. We solve for that. So if you look at that true end-to-end flow of users at a site connecting to applications, from a networking layer, I have some sort of a misbehaving link, I have a lossy link. Like I said, we're able to deliver FEC, packet dupe, and TCP techniques there on the last mile. Now, where I used to have limited visibility, if I'm going to an SSE solution, I give you full end-to-end visibility. I give you your network stats, I give you your security stats, I give you your application stats. So I have more granular insights so that when I do have an application performance issue, I am better equipped to make the best decision on path selection, right? By virtue of that, I also can go active actor across multiple regions so that I actually pick the best region as well. So when I see application brownouts, once again, I can actually dynamically fail over to the appropriate regions. So we give the full life cycle of that session and resiliency and security across the entire fabric. Now, from a security standpoint, since we are talking about a zero trust branch, what are we bringing to the table here? So with Prisma Access, we give you a true like NIST defined, right? So what I mean by that is it's not just about validating or verifying a user or a device up front and saying, okay, I trust you. Now go onto the network and do whatever you need to do. With us, it's basically a continuous verification, whether it's a user, whether it's an IoT device or a laptop or a managed device, or it's your application. Now, the reason I'm saying application, most of us think of application fingerprinting as a one-time affair. I detect that this is SharePoint. I detect that this is Salesforce. I detect that this is Telnet. I detect this is DNS. But if you think about like DNS and different protocol based technologies, they're the common services that they run on. But what if I actually modify them? How does the system know? So what if I'm not running DNS on 53 and I'm running it on some other protocol or some other port? How is the system going to know? So this is where we actually do heuristics, and there's multiple techniques on our app engine that we do, and we continuously verify. So even if you come into the front door and you verify with standard mechanisms, and you decide to become a bad actor once you've entered the premise, essentially we'll be able to detect that and pick it up. Now, how do I now deliver all the security needs? So once again, there's some workloads I want to turn on DLP. There's other workloads I just want to provide internet security. There's other workloads I want to do URL filtering. So regardless of your use cases at that branch, we are able to deliver a full suite of functionality. Now, I had mentioned the IoT one, so I'm going to double click a little bit on the IoT use case. So with IoT, we've actually embedded it into our solution now. So the SD-WAN Ion appliance, which is basically sits at your branches, it becomes the IoT sensor. Now, with IoT, obviously, you can configure that IoT as DHCP. You can configure that IoT as static. With our solution, regardless of your connectivity mechanism, we're able to actually fingerprint and do that device ID check against that. And it's not just about fingerprinting. We also want to do basically a posture check against that device as well. So we can come back and tell you and give you information around what version of code they're on. Is it on default password and username? Are there any CVEs against that operating system it's in? And we see a lot of like headless devices that are IoT within that environment. And whether it's medical IoT, industrial IoT, building IoT, it doesn't matter. This library basically detects and controls everything. And will give you full visibility into every component of IoT within your environment. Then, obviously, we'll actually do additional capabilities such as behavioral analytics, where we can actually understand what are the common services that device talks to. So the most common things we see in our buildings that we've been using for years is printers. So we know that there's certain printer vendors out there, and they will go to their known websites to do the patch management, upgrade of code. There's common services they talk to. Essentially, the system understands that. So it actually looks at all the behaviors of that specific vendor and printer in this example. Now, I also know then globally, because I'm actually collecting this data, I'm crowdsourcing, I'm looking at all the behavioral analytics of that specific vendor product, so that when I see anomalies from that, I'll actually report on that, which allows me then to basically say that, is it a known anomaly, meaning that I actually know that it should be talking to some service in my data center, or it's actually talking to some site in Russia that it shouldn't be. I'll actually give you that intel, and then you can apply a policy. And fundamentally, all printers with all devices with that printer vendor, I'm blocking the connection to Russia in this example, and fundamentally it will course correct to that. So this is not just about inventory management. It's not just about detection. It's also about behavioral analytics and security, right? So it's a full life cycle of that. So now coming back to that example, if it's a trusted third-party vendor, I do work with, let's just say my HVAC system at a building, and they just manage it for me. If a bad actor were to come in via that HVAC system, I will be able to detect that and I'll be able to stop it. You can choose to apply a policy to say that you're going to quarantine them or just block them out of the system altogether, right? So it's actually a pretty powerful tool. It's a gap and an area that most people haven't thought about, but it's absolutely a need, and more customers are looking into this. Now, from a pure operational standpoint, like I said, the biggest challenge is that finger pointing game. Whose problem is it? So one of the things we did was the first step to solve for this is actually unification of identity. So what we did is we ported over the identity engine of our security solution onto the Prisma SD-WAN solution. So now, whether it's Prisma SD-WAN or Prisma Access, it's the same user ID, same device ID, same app ID, which allows me now, so if I'm in my networking solution with SD-WAN and I'm looking at logs to figure out some sort of an error or some sort of misbehavior, and then I go to the next hop and I look at my security logs, I can track a user, I can track a device, I can track an application all the way through, right? So I'm not looking at finger pointing anymore. I'm able to do a better job of event correlation. I'm in one tool. I'm not logging into 5, 6 different tools. So it gives you better controls operationally around the environment from a troubleshooting standpoint. Secondly, from a zero trust perspective, it allows me to maintain a consistent policy. So I have a policy for Mitesh, and whether I'm sitting at home, whether I'm sitting in a Palo Alto office, or I'm traveling around the world and staying at different hotels and meeting with different customers, that policy remains with me, right? So I'm better able to control a true zero trust policy engine across everything. Now, like I said, I talked a lot about AI ML built into the solution and how we operate and how we understand sessions and that. But let's take it one step further. So when you think about it, the reason I said we operate at a session layer, the reason I say we operate at an application layer is fundamentally this. Because how do you troubleshoot your network today? If you think about all the tools that you use, your typical tools, first of all, I've been in this business long enough and I've been on the networking side long enough where I know that every time there's a problem or a ticket open, network is always the first line of defense. We then have to prove it's not us and somewhere else if it really is, but we have to go through the mechanics of troubleshooting that. So essentially now what I'm able to do by operating a session layer is that I can track that session and calculate different metrics. Now, how did I do that in the past? When I did have that problem and my traditional ping, trace route table lookups, ARP table lookups, all of that fun stuff didn't garner anything and I couldn't tell where the problem was, what did I do? Then maybe I went to my out-of-band management tools. I went to the SolarWinds, the Live Action, and the various APM, NPM tools out there in the market that most customers have. So even if that didn't tell me anything, what did I do as a networking person? My tool of last resort was basically looking at packet captures. So I went to Wireshark. I basically ran Wireshark at that site on the person's laptop or on some device at that site, and I basically monitored the network. Now, most of us don't even enjoy that. Most of us don't even care to analyze that, but that was the tool of last resort. So then that would give me all the metadata information about that transaction, that session, and then basically capture that issue. But now what happens when you capture that packet, when you do that packet capture, the problem may or may not be there anymore. So what are you really capturing? Secondly, it's a good tool to get a baseline of a set application. What we do with our solution is that for every application coming through at that particular site, doesn't matter which users are accessing it, we actually track that and we give you a baseline. So you can see it here. Here I'm only looking at a 1 hour window, but fundamentally you'll actually have this. Now in our reporting tool, you can actually go back up to 90 days. So you can actually see a good consistent nature of that set application so that when a user calls in complaining about slowness, I actually can look at this and say, okay, is it really slow or is this just normal behavior first and foremost? And if it is slow, is it really the network that's causing it or the application that's causing it? So as you can see on the screen line here, basically I'm looking at the round trip time of that application. So technically the network latency. And then the orange line is the application response time. So very clearly, I can see right here where normally I'm getting sub-second application response time, so it's pretty responsive. I'm seeing it's actually jumping up here. So instead of actually spending hours or days troubleshooting the network, I know to go straight to the application and see what's going on with it, right? It may be a resource issue on the compute it's sitting on, whatever the case may be, but it allows you to go straight to the root of the problem or the device that's an issue in the environment. And when I do see an issue, what do what capabilities do I bring? So because I'm able to baseline all the applications, I can then create a performance policy engine which says, okay, if you breach a certain threshold, move the flow, create an incident. Like I said, if it's real-time applications like a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever collaboration tool you have, you essentially can turn on FEC and packet dupe, or maybe you just want to have visibility into it. You don't care to do anything about it. You just want to know about it. So you have full control of what happens. So most of our customers that do this, they basically um, take their critical applications, which are usually a dozen or two applications, and then they basically baseline this and create policy against this. So you have flexibility. You can choose to do this on hundreds of applications. You can choose to do this on a subset of applications. You have all the rich data in front of you to do right by your business. Fundamentally, like I said, what we're trying to do here is you don't have to go and run a ping test. You don't have to go and run trace routes and things like that. We want to give you full insights and visibility from the tool. And most importantly, our solution, when we say actionable analytics, our solution is using all of this data to actually pick the best available path so that you don't have that user experience issue and you don't get that support call. But we know things happen and what happens when it does and what is the process of when it does. And that's what we wanted to go and solve for as well. Lastly, like I said, this is the ADEM solution. So this is where, like I said, above and beyond the SD-WAN fabric that we built, I want to know if there's basically an issue at one of the hops all the way to the application. So this is where we can hold our carriers accountable. This is where we can also hold, our LAN switching, switching wireless, whatever, right? So we can see end to end the health of every hop. We'll give you full visibility into it, and that way it will actually give you better troubleshooting tools as well as data, so that if you were to call a carrier and complain about their circuit or their behavior, you have the data to back it up as well. Now, we live in a world of AI and co-pilots these days, so I'll touch on what we're doing here. So if you think about it, everything I just showed you requires me logging into a portal, operating, managing it in that. Now, there's been a learning curve for any net new tool that we use. There's always a learning curve. So what our intention here is that to get to a point where you don't have to understand all the mechanics of the tool. Fundamentally, you have intention on what you want to do for a set application, how you want to run your business and how you troubleshoot. You just want to do natural language querying and say, I want to understand the health of my sites in the Northeast. I want to understand the health of my New York site. And it's going to spit back relevant information and give you that data. Am I oversubscribed on my circuit at a set site? I have an outage, open a ticket automatically. So all of those things, we're basically building a co-pilot to allow your administrators as well as executives at an organization to be able to query the network and understand what's going on. So that way, when they do get the calls, instead of waiting and trying to get a hold of people, they have full access to the environment. Now, obviously, when I'm saying full access, you then have RBAC control. So you can say that these users only have view-only access and they can just query and whatever response come back. And then you can have administrators where they would not only get the view only, but depending on what comes back, if you want to change your policy, if you want to make a config change, things like that, they would have controls over doing that as well. So we'll have the full tie down of RBAC against the users that manage the environment as well. So I just wanted to tie everything back, right? So if you think about from a SD-WAN and a zero trust branch management perspective and a pure networking standpoint, like I said, because networking is always the first line of defense, the way we architected and built the solution, we wanted to first and foremost basically solve for time to innocence. And through the nature of software defined, we want to basically also solve for the problem of time to value, like how the speed of deployment, the speed of making configuration changes, the speed of making policy changes, all of that equates to time to value, right? When I do have an outage, how quickly can I resolve that issue? So overall, hopefully you've seen that we basically went out and solved for time to value, time to innocence, and ultimately time to remediation. We've seen this in the industry. We have a lot of stats that our customers have benefited, both from an operational standpoint and a technology standpoint. Feel free to reach out to us, and we can share more details and kind of talk through your environment and get a better understanding of it. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Scott.
All right. Yeah, really nice presentation, Mitesh. I feel much smarter about SD-WAN and SASE than I did before. We've got a lot of questions here from the audience. So the first one, they're wondering, why are application awareness and SLAs imperative to deliver optimized performance for today's apps?
Yeah, great question, Scott. So when you think about it, like I said, the in today's world, more so than 20, 30 years ago, is that we live in a ubiquitous world. My applications could be anywhere. For all I know, Scott, you could have an application server sitting at your house that I need to access. Nobody has any idea where the apps live today, right? And so, in order to one make the decision of getting to your house as quickly as possible, it's not just about saying, "Well, I think the best path then is just to go straight out the internet," because I may be in Indonesia on the other side of the world, and I may take 30 hops to your house, but there's multiple paths to your house from Indonesia. How do I actually know which is the best one? Just dumping it on the internet is not the right answer. And so this is where we wanted to actually take it a step further than beyond just looking at network stats, generic network stats, I should say, that are collected between my house, like in Indonesia, and connected to some data center sitting in Japan. What has that got to do with me connecting to your house in the US, right? So this is where the relevance came in of actually looking at applications health stats and then using those app stats to make path selections.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Next question here. How does Prisma SD-WAN automate day two operations with the power of AI and ML?
Yeah. So this is where I was talking about the whole time to value, right? So we were purpose built from the ground up. So when we said software defined, we truly are software defined. There's many vendors in the market today that basically still are just another router and an ASIC based solution, meaning the brains of the solution is still on that box. Our approach was, hey, if I abstract the control plane and the data plane, number one, and essentially then I have the ability to operate this using true API models, right? And that gives me better flexibility in one, operating the current solution through automation. So I can essentially automate the bring up of a solution. I can automate day two from change management. And in the other aspect of this, which I didn't touch on, is actually automating services with third party. So if you think about just ITSM tools like ServiceNow for ticketing, right? I actually have the ability to automate with that. Where if you look at a traditional router, if you may, right, you would have to write some middleware application to interface with ServiceNow. Whereas with us, we can do a direct integration into ServiceNow. And I'm using the ServiceNow just as an example. It could be any application, right? And so we were absolutely an API first architecture to not only solve for the current solution, but also integrations into third party.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Um, Next one here. Do Palo Alto Networks Ion appliances fit all of our branch and data center needs? And also, how does it help with branch consolidation?
No, great question. Yeah, so we do have a full family of products, all the way from the low end, small box retail as an example, to a home user, to all the way to a large campus type locations, right? So we have a breadth of technologies, both for your different sizes of branches, as well as your cloud workload. So some customers have they've moved away from physical data centers and literally ride the entire business in one of the CSPs, right? AWS, GCP, Azure, whatever other providers around the world. And so we actually are in the marketplace with those providers. And like I mentioned during the call, some customers choose to use the Equinexes and the Megaports as a middle mile. We are also in the marketplace of those guys. So we have a full suite of products regardless of your use case.
Okay. All right. Very cool. Well, we're almost up on time here. But if people want to find out more, do you have any recommendations for them as far as good next steps?
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you all for participating. Really enjoyed the conversation. We have a link on here, and we'll post it in the chat window as well. Feel free to reach out to us directly. And if you know your local Palo Alto rep and SC, they absolutely know how to get a hold of me.
Okay. All right. Well, Mitesh, thank you so much. This has been really informative. Really appreciate your time today.
Now, thank you, Scott, for having me.
All right. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Kevin McDaniel from Virginia. Congratulations to Kevin McDaniel. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Palo Alto Networks for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a great rest of your day.